Thank you so much, Robert. It's such a pleasure to be back here at ICE again. I feel like it's a little bit of a high school reunion with so many friends and colleagues that sort of feel like family. Robert was very discreet because when I think back on when we met, it makes me feel very, very young because it was in our pre-married, pre-child days where we could all sit in Parisian cafes until the early hours of the morning discussing how we were going to change the world through what we called at the time electronic. And through that journey, Robert, Mort, Teresa, and Pardo, who I know is here, we've really been on that journey with the UN and the EU from electronic government to e-government to digital government. And what I want to talk to you about today is to the end point where any word before government will ultimately disappear, because we don't know the pathway of the journey, but we know where the journey, we don't know the train rail, but we know where the journey is ending. And the journey is ending where we can close our eyes for a moment and say, if we were starting over, would we, with a blank piece of paper, would we deal with what we have today, or would we really imagine a world where engaging with government services is as easy as talking to a friend? And I say that because I think it's a really powerful vision that I'd like you to keep in your minds as we talk a little bit more about our views on digital transformation. Because we know that the world has changed. Some of us in this room actually remember, and I half think that's a picture of me when I was 7, but we actually remember when we used to have a phone, and some of the women my age, do you remember you take the phone and you'd go into the bathroom and you'd close the door so you could gossip to your girlfriends or your dad didn't hear you talk to a guy. And now think about the world we're in now, where Steve Jobs' vision of technology being an extension of ourselves, of our humanity, has come to fruition. How many of us panic when we don't have our phone, think the world is going to end if we can't check our emails in 3 seconds? And of course, that's not true. And I would argue there is good and bad about this transformation that Jobs discussed. But it's happened, right? So the world has changed, and technology, through that change, has changed us all. It's changed our expectations of time and place. It's changed our expectations of communication. It's changed our expectations of what we can get when we want it and no matter where we are. And again, I was talking in Ballarat with some folks yesterday. Before I got up to speak, my 13-year-old in the mountains on the Maine Canadian border is texting me to see if he can stay with his friends on a Friday night, and I'm texting my husband to see if he's playing a blinder to try to play us off of each other. And all of that with a 16-hour time zone difference when I'm halfway around the world and I had just seen a mob of kangaroos in the morning. That is transformational, right? That is a whole different world than even the world, Robert, you and I and Mort discussed back also in the plains of Hungary. We're going to do an around-the-world tour for the next ICE and tell you all the different bizarre places and fantastic places like Melbourne that we've met. Government, as we know, is really no exception. But I want to go back for a moment because all of us know departments around the world where this paper-laden mess is still a reality, okay? And we also know, as you said, Robert, so nicely, the shared capital that we've collectively created through forums like ICE, through projects funded by the UN, the World Bank, the EU. We've created a shared capital in which we really have achieved so much together. We really have taken so many processes and digitized them. But I would argue that if we're really honest with each other as colleagues, so far, we've really just scratched the surface. We've really just digitized the status quo. We've taken the processes of the 20th century that we know, and much like we took that phone cord and we put it into a phone, we've taken the standard business as usual and we've turned it into a world of competing apps, which often confuse citizens. Leading governments like Australia are starting to have one portal where you can access all of your information, but we're pretty much, and in citizen services through a much easier journey, but pretty much around the world, we've got citizens competing with a world of differing apps. Especially those of you that have worked with me in smart cities, I think that's really endemic. It's just the land of pilots having pilots and apps giving birth to apps. But it's not to denigrate the progress. This has been a really hard journey, and it's come through a lot of different and dedicated work, through public servants that are advocates and champions of change, willing to take a risk in a change-averse culture, through to, my academic colleagues here today that have devoted their careers to studying and advancing best practice and sharing it around the world. But at this particular inflection point in history, it's a cliche to say the pace of change has never been faster, but we know that. It's almost a cliche now to even talk about the fourth industrial revolution. But the pace of change has never been faster. So the expectations of a kind of Amazon-type service that I could talk about in Brodo, I'm not sure if you were at the ministerial conference, but I remember the first time I said the Amazon CRM knows that I like private practice, so I'd like the Grey's Anatomy, so sister program. Why can't government know that? We're so beyond those expectations, those very limited expectations of early e-commerce. We're really in a world now where our ability to get what we want, when we want it, wherever we want it, how we want it, in what color, in what shape, and in what form, is changing our whole relationship to society, to each other, to technology. So by definition, it's changing our expectations of government, and it's placing even more pressure on government to do even more with less, a familiar dilemma we all know about. That pace is never going to slow down. It is always going to increase. There was a time, if I digress and show my age a little, where we wondered whether or not we needed to do the UNU-EGOV survey. I think it was around 2006, just before social media exploded onto the world, because we thought everything's been put on a website, we've digitized the status quo, job done. And then, of course, the whole wave of social media and mobile, GPS, data, open data, linked data, structured data, Timothy Berners-Lee's vision of the Internet of the future started to come online, and we had to begin the journey all over again. And where we're ending, despite the pathways we're going to take to get there, is a cognitive government, an AI-infused government, whatever terms we want to use. I would say, when we talk about AI, and I know we had a lot of discussions yesterday about AI. I know we had a lot of discussions about IoT, discussions about shared services, discussions about municipalities joining together to harness the data that feeds the beast that makes the AI work. We talk about AI at IBM as augmented intelligence. And I just wanted to just share that with you, because I think there's a very big difference when we talk about AI or cognitive between a world in which we feed the data beast gets fed and we just let a machine make decisions for us, versus a world in which we augment human intelligence by having the automatic things that machines can do and process, do what they do, and humans do what they do best, because humans empathize, humans love, humans create, humans appreciate beauty, humans connect with one another. And I would argue that will never be replaced. But what AI or cognitive capabilities can do is harness data, process that data, and create hypotheses at a pace unknown in the history of humankind. I need to do a little Googling and get my facts right, because I'm going to get the exact statistics wrong, but it's something like 1 million articles on cancer are generated by academics around the world every year. More than any doctor, any research institution itself could possibly process. AI can process those documents in a week. It's not going to cure cancer. It's not going to give you, Robert, the right exact hypothesis for your particular situation. But this, U.S. House, this U.S. TV show called House, where, this geniac brain could process all of these rare diseases and come up with the cure. We are living in a world now where AI can take that body of research and present the doctor with hypotheses that quicker and more easily enable a patient to be solved. If we bring that into a government sphere that's personal to me, my very first day with the IBM Corporation, you can imagine it was a little overwhelming coming from a 10-person boutique to a 400,000-person company. But the humanity and the power of this transformational turning point we're at really hit me, because we were having a long, detailed technical discussion with a ministry that had just suffered a very serious attack against its citizens. And we were lost in the technology, and the minister kind of said, you know, to, I think almost keep himself awake, has this happened have you used this anywhere? And this guy in the back of the room kind of just quietly said, yeah. You know, when I was deployed in Iraq, we used it to identify 450 terrorists, and we think we saved about 750 lives. Our casualties went down 80%. And I just had a goose pimple moment. I talked about it yesterday. I got goose pimples. I'm talking to you now. I have goose pimples. I was so new. I didn't know who this person was. I said, did you do that, what, as an IBMer? No, when I was an analyst with the U.S. Army deployed in the battlefield. Those are lives that get transformed by this technology when we harness it properly. And that is really powerful, powerful stuff. But if I come back very, very quickly to all of the discussions we started yesterday, we've been engaged in for almost 20 years now, all of this stuff is easy to talk about. The interesting use cases, the transformational life-saving use cases are you know, increasingly able to be identified. But meanwhile, back at Planet, your office and mine, even my office, as the general manager of a $9 billion industry, doing this is hard. It's hard because we have legacy, and that legacy is messy, and it's siloed. And often even within an agency, the databases don't talk to each other and they don't interoperate. But it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole of legacy modernization, because often the IT shop in a government-built department understands legacy, and they just want somebody to tell them what they need to do later, but they've got to keep the lights on with decreasing budgets. And that's a full-time preoccupation and job, because they're not going to get any credit for the sexy modernization if you can't pay your taxes or social service payments don't go out on time. You know, in Australia, the Department of Health and Human Services is one of the most sophisticated, largest, and most, you know, advanced in-house IT shops in the country. And they're very, very proud of it. They need to be, because if that system goes down for 3 days, the GDP of Australia suffers. Right? This is not just Yazzie, the GE app, and the bank, or, you know, the Netflix app, right? This is mission-critical stuff. So it's very, very easy when we start talking about legacy modernization to just go down the rabbit hole of fixing the problems. Somebody that works for an IT company, I have 1 million people that can go and fix an ERP system. We're really, really good at that. Harder to have, because we're part of our own transformation as we're helping governments transform, harder to have our teams link that transformation to the end goal of the kind of AI-infused decision-making I've been talking about. The way our teams have been working for the last 3 years to overcome that is taking a 4-stage of government. Many of you will be familiar with. It's based on Lane's 4 stages of government, which in turn the UN based in its 4 stages of government, which Teresa Pardo and I 2016 started trying to talk to the UN about introducing a kind of data-infused collaborative 4th stage. I wouldn't say we invented the word AI or cognitive. It wasn't mainstream then, but we were grappling with it. So the 2 problems, going down the legacy modernization hole and never really going beyond digitizing the status quo and making it fit for purpose in 2019. The other big danger is taking the bright, shiny toy, an AI chatbot, and we know that bots are the first bit of AI that is becoming, you know, more ubiquitously infused throughout government, putting the bot on and thinking you're transformed. So between the rabbit hole of modernization and the shiny toy that you put, in other words, lipstick on a pig, right? You're taking something really shiny and you're saying, hey, voila, I have a chatbot, I'm transformed. My message to everyone is that chatbot is the app of yesterday, and it's a red herring. If we're not really, really careful about fundamentally understanding where we are in the journey, and then more importantly, understanding where we want to go, and being very meticulous in the foundational technologies that we need to put in place, such as, you know, omni-channel, cloud, platform. It's a journey. Simply sticking a bot on, simply putting an IoT app in isn't going to do it. To work on that journey, we have to genuinely take human-centered design. really get stakeholders, business and IT in a government agency, vendors, who we should be thinking about as partners, and if we aren't, we shouldn't be working with them, right? Users are the workforce within an agency, because we know government has a skills shortage, and it will only get worse if the tools that government employees have don't match what they can have in the private sector, and citizens. And we create an ecosystem to genuinely chart and reimagine the future possibilities of how we get from where we are to where we want to be. I'll digress for a minute and say one thing about human-centered design. It's fantastic that everywhere I go in the world, everyone is talking about it. It was really, really great at the last UN-EGOV expert group. We were increasingly discussing it in a meaningful way. But there is a danger, because design thinking is not simply sticking a Post-it note, right? It's becoming a little bit of a cliche, like digital transformation. I have a chatbot, therefore I'm transformed. I have a Post-it note, therefore I'm human-centered. It's a really deep process with a lot of people that have devoted their careers to understanding how you take that complex blend of stakeholders together to really co-create, because we know when we co-create, we co-own. When we co-own, we're co-vested in the success of a digital project, and forge that pathway vision for where we want to take our agency. Because when you do that, you really are able to create a strategy and a roadmap for the future. Now, this is where the tech companies start digging you guys down into the, techie speak and the middleware, and I'm not going to do that. Just to say that every technology company worth its salt has processes and has really deep domain expertise to create a powerful roadmap and to make sure that it's infused with robust technologies. Don't let anybody start with this slide. Any partner comes in to an EU project, which I'm very familiar with, and wants to just start with the middleware and the testing, and that's the wrong place. We need to start with the human, and we need to start with the vision, because the vision is to really reinvent government as we know it, to really make sure that as we start to experiment with bots and we start to figure out how to aggregate enough chat data for those chats to be meaningful, that we're really infusing the capabilities across the whole of government. And I would really say hats off to the Australian government, somebody that's been advancing the whole of government agenda for 15 years now. They are practicing what they preach, and they are putting frameworks in place to really encourage agencies to work together in a more collaborative manner, to really restructure relationships with the IT community so that it is trusted partner, not vendor client, not bad old contracts where everybody's arguing over the colons and the semi-commas and, change controlling each other into infinity. I certainly remember when, contracts when I was at Accenture, we'd charge a client $10,000 to change a homepage. Can you even imagine? I mean, I'm sure it was glory days and when you were being measured as a vendor, but it was the beginning of a really corrosive rot in the relationship between the IT community and government transformation. And we're at a precipice now where we're really reinventing that through initiatives like the Australian government's whole of government framework approach to partnering with vendors. Because when we do this, and when we get this right, we will be able to take government services to that end destination I told you about. Because I can't tell you what the train line is exactly. I can tell you there are procedures. I can tell you the mistakes not to make. I can tell you the tools to use like human-centered design. But I don't know. Every agency, every government, every situation is going to be different. But I can tell you what I know, having worked in this field for 20 years. The end goal is a government that delivers personalized services, that eventually harnesses the data that is safe to share, that is secure to share within the parameters of security requirements like GDPR and obviously health data, personal data. But we are going to get services that are increasingly personalized to where I am in the world, but more importantly, that's GPS, that's old, where I am in my life journey. Not just citizen services that are centered around a life event, but are centered around me, Julia, a mother of a 13-year-old who travels the world, my journey, okay? And that journey will constantly be updated as I engage with government, and government has the ability to take that knowledge and continuously adapt what I'm telling what I'm telling the system and what the system is learning from other people like me at similar points in life, at similar places in the world. And then accessible. Again, I was involved in some of the deployments when we were putting kiosks, public service kiosks in train stations and libraries, right? It just seems so old-fashioned now. But increasingly, technology and access to services will be wherever we are, however we want to engage with those services. I heard a futurologist in Doha a couple of years ago that talked about you'll press a button, you know, you'll just touch a screen and the internet will come up through the back of our paper, you know, wherever we are, the wall, the desk, wherever. I mean, that's not so far in the future. But it will also be citizen-driven. And by citizen-driven, I mean not just co-created with a hackathon or a little social media chat. It will be using that data that is infused into existing systems and new modernizations that are put on top of those systems to constantly adapt. That will be the new definition of co-created services, services that are created through me proactively engaging with government, but also through government proactively engaging with the data that augmented intelligence will let us share. So my closing call to action, as it were, is please don't think the journey's overwhelming. Any agency can start where they are and start to infuse the new into the vision of a transformed, personalized, seamlessly blended service. It's at our fingertips. The time is now. The danger is to just do half the journey rather than the whole. Thank you.
Alan Lloyd Kubel. I'm probably one of the oldest guys in the room here, and I can say in 1985 we built password attributes about a person. There were about 5 or 6 attributes. With mission systems, with defense, US, got more serious, and with service delivery platforms, we actually used 1,000 attributes per user for the experience they needed when they logged on. That was in 2005. And now we're building what we call social experience systems. So it's another 1,000 attributes plus about 20 or 30 interactions we need to understand. And so anybody who's architecting or defining business case, they really need to move into this information. What do we know about you? What's your experiences? Who do you relate to? And that really starts to form this transformed world we need. So I'm just saying, trying to confirm what you're saying is right, but the aspect of that is architects and business managers need to start thinking about big information systems.
Yeah. I wonder if our paths crossed in the UK. Despite the Brooklyn accent, I spent 30 years working with the government, so I'm sure we've worked on similar projects. And I would say, you know, the point about the architecture is not to get too technical, but it is really important that we're architecting for the future, and the future will be open.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. My question is about legislative issues to implement these personalized services. At some point yesterday, we heard in Europe, for example, some information can be exchanged via internet because considered as very sensible, very personalized. So how governments should tackle these legislative issues that can hinder this technological development, according to you? Thank you.
Look, it's an excellent question. And I'm not here to say it's nirvana and all we have to do is harness the art of the possible and everything will be transformed. Because we're at not only an inflection point in terms of pace of change and data generation, but I think we're going to see some really serious cyber threats that are going to call into question data sharing to its fundamental core. And that's going to be hugely dangerous for the stability of societies, of course, but it's also going to be hugely dangerous for this agenda. Because what we can't do, and there will be, for every one of you in this room, you will go back and there will be 15 people that will say, that means we can do nothing. We just stand still, put some lipstick on a pig, keep that siloed legacy thing going, the politicians are going to shut it all down. And that will be a disaster. Because nothing stands still in time, and those of us that care passionately about social good and social capital and improving public service delivery know we have to then work within embed security as a service, foundational, not an add-on, okay? not let today's legislation stop us from what we know as practitioners is a train that will not stop. We know that open architecture is what we're going to need. We know that tools like blockchain will give us a better ability to have permissioned access. And we know that no matter what the data huggers tell you, there is data that can be open, safe, and securely right now, this very moment in time, in perpetuity, that will do no harm. And then there is data that we need to be really, really sensitive to. What we have to make sure is we keep getting that balance right and not let the forces of status quo suffocate and throw the baby out with the bathwater. And one example, when open data first started, the biggest explosions of benefit and creativity with open data is transportation. You just go to London and use any of the apps thanks to the open data policy. Well, the Belgian rail system took the Open Knowledge Foundation to court because not only did they refuse to make their data open, but when these diligent colleagues of mine spent a month putting it all online, manually transcribing it, they took them to court. And their legal argument, I swear, I still laugh about this, it's 10 years later, it still just cracks me up. Their argument was, well, people might miss their trains. Because in their mind, the data might have been transcribed inaccurately, and so they might miss their trains. Like brochures don't get printed inaccurately, like they don't get nailed up at train stations behind glass walls, but of course in a digital age, the whole community of open data, the whole ecosystem will go and correct that, and it will be back out on the web in like 3 seconds faster than any bureaucracy. But that's the mindset. So whilst the challenges are real and legislation hurdles are going to go up and down in time, it's the mindset we have to all as a community keep battling.
So we have time for one more question, please, here, and then we'll come back in the plenary and we can take your questions there.
Thank you, Mark Toomey from the Digital Leadership Institute. We have a Prime Minister and a Treasurer in Australia who seem absolutely wedded to the old world. They demonstrated that with a lump of coal in Parliament. I'm sure that if they were having a conversation about information technology in government, they would pull out the abacus and tell us how powerful it is. Yesterday, we heard about India's amazing sanitation revolution and how that was led by the Prime Minister. What do we do? How do we transform the thinking of our political and bureaucratic leaders in government to develop that vision of cognitive government and actually run towards it as hard as they can?
It's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. One thing I know through 15 years with the UN, leadership from above is where that real transformation happens. So Prime Minister Modi's e-Kranti is real. He is committed to it, and it is paying off in spades. So there is no silver bullet. But I would also say, Australia is number 2 in the UNU-EGOV survey. Number 2 in the world. That's a phenomenal achievement. And one thing I find with leaders anywhere I go in the world, leading governments, they're always dissatisfied. They always think they're behind. They always want to do more. That's why you're a leader in Australia. So, the fact that the government has come out with a vision to be the top 3 in the world, and you're number 2 already, means it's not as bad. And I've been in Australia enough over the last 15 months that I've been following the politics. I sort of feel like a citizen. I know the coal debate. It will not happen without leadership, but don't underestimate the leadership that you do have. And to really answer your question, when there isn't leadership, it's exposing politicians to the art of the possible. It is not exposing them to death by middleware. Do not make the mistake some of our teams did, bringing politicians to really funky, cool, state-of-the-art facilities and then showing them slides until they're falling asleep. Show them what it really means in a human-centric way, because that's what politicians care about.
Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So imagine a situation like Watson or Alexa. So how do I get a passport? Okay, for applying to passport, you need a birth certificate, you need a residential certificate, and this is the fees. Okay, so how do I apply? So I tell him my date of birth. Okay, what is your address? So you can take my address proof from my digital locker. Okay, so like this, Alexa will ask all the questions, and Alexa will read out, this is your form. Are you okay? Should I submit the form? Then Alexa submits the form as per your command. And it will submit the form through the backend platform and gives you the application reference number. It also remembers your application reference number. For future, you can track. So after 3 days, you can ask, what is the status of my application? And it gives you the application status, what is this status. So I think in distant future, when you were talking, I was thinking of this a situation, so that you don't remember. The government services are so easy that it will find out which department, what are the possibilities, how to submit, and it will track you on the fly. So you need not even open the website also. So I think that should be the ideal game. And for this, you need not have a smartphone also. You can talk from your Alexa device, or from a feature phone device, or from anything which is voice enabled. So this is you can say, artificial intelligence based voice assistant system, which even a common man can use in India, because you can give a toll-free number and the engine will reside on the other end. So you are not having power you can have a simple feature phone in India. So good morning. So as you know, India is a big country having 1.3 billion people with average age of about 35 years. And the aim of Digital India was to transform India into a digitally empowered society and knowledge economy. So we basically envisioned 3 areas, that digital infrastructure as a utility to every citizen, that means broadband internet and mobile connectivity to all with bank accounts also. And then once we provide the infrastructure, every citizen should be having these services, and thereafter to empower them by making digitally literate. So with this Digital India vision we started, and I would like to mention some of the major projects and what is their status. So one of the biggest project was the digital identity, which we call the Aadhaar. So we have provided 1.2 billion digital identities, Aadhaar connections. So far, we have 1.2 mobile connections and 500 million internet connections. So from Aadhaar, it is backed by a legal act, and there is a strong political will to use Aadhaar for projects like direct benefit transfer. So far, I give you some statistics, 28 billion authentications have happened through the Aadhaar system, through the digital identity system. And we are using to pay the direct benefit transfer through unique ID. So far 500 schemes are covered, which transfer the subsidy directly into the bank accounts of the poor men, and about $94 billion have been transferred, and $17 billion have been saved because of administrative expenses, or you can say in some cases corruption also. So another big project is the digital locker. Digital locker, government is giving one digital locker of 1 GB to everybody, and we are having 3.5 billion documents. So any department which is issuing a document, it is being pushed into digital locker. So you can simply pick up a digital document from your digital locker and apply to any government scheme. And you can show your from digital locker, you can show your driving license to any police cop who is there on the roadside. So you need not carry your physical copy. So another big project is the unified mobile application for new age governance. As you know, every department comes out with the mobile applications, and we were having about 1,200 applications, and that was just tip of the iceberg. So we came out with the unified mobile application. It connects various government departments on the back end through API connections, and citizens are getting 360 services on the one mobile application. It is just 18 MB. And our target is to provide 1,200 services from this single application. Some of the other projects are like GEM, Government E-Marketplace, which is a marketplace like Amazon for procurement by the government departments, and by any businesses can offer their services. And for the common man, we are also giving services through CSCs, Customer Services Centers, and through which people can go and take assistance, and who cannot directly use the services through mobile applications, they can go to CSC. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Neeraj, in sharing with us the impressive numbers from the Indian transformation. Life, so what do you think about the use of technology in government?
Well, thanks to both of the previous speakers. Thank you, Robert. I've decided to take a little more of the skeptical role here and voice some concerns for the development. I think many of us in the rooms, including myself, are technology optimists, and I think that that's sort of the tone in conferences like this. We truly, firmly believe that technology can improve lives for most of the people in society. But what is really happening, and that is what the center that I am chairing right now, the Center for Digital Transformation of Society, is interested in looking into. I firmly believe and agree with IBM and other companies that AI can solve some massive problems that we have in societies. However, if we look at what is happening, yesterday there was talk about inequality and that we want to reduce inequality. I'm not sure if inequality is actually being reduced. If we look at the numbers, inequality seems to rise rather than being reduced. More and more wealth is gathered on fewer and fewer hands. Middle class is diminishing in the Western world. These are some issues that I think we need to be concerned with. And I think we need to perhaps once in a while take a step back and see, is this development that we are now promoting contributing to greater equality or greater inequality? I don't have the answers. I think you can find arguments for both sides. But that also calls for us to stand back and carefully reflect about the development. Data is now seen as the foundation for innovation, the basis for AI and application of AI. And there is a lot of talk about using data, providing data for the people so that everybody can utilize these data. I'm not sure if everybody can utilize those data. I think it's a very small section of the population that can actually utilize those data. So most of us citizens are in the hands of some technology experts, and that calls for some action, I think, both for governments and also for us as researchers to try to look into the bigger perspective, try to outline the broader picture, both the pros and the cons. I think we need more knowledge in several areas. I mean, privacy is being challenged. The big 5 tech companies are collecting information about us, whether we like it or not. It's not an option for us, really, to say no to these digital services. So as we get more and more smart devices, IoT devices, if you like, into our homes, somebody will know much more about us than they used to know before. I don't think they are collecting these data for foul purposes, but I think there is a risk that these data can be misused. And I think we should really go at some lengths to look into really. There is a call for both regulation and for legislation and also for more critical research. I think also we should ask the question if our core societal values like trust and democracy is also under attack. Quite a few people have argued that. Partly because of the use of AI, not this intentional use of AI as we got through the keynote. But there are other, I mean, the US election in 2016 is a much used example. That illustrated a problem that we didn't know about before, that we could actually use data to manipulate elections. That is possible now because of the new technologies that we speak so highly about. And I'm not saying we should stop. I don't think it's possible even to stop the development. But I think we need a broad perspective. I think we need to broaden the discussion. The information systems discipline that I come from recently called in one of the top journals for more research on the unintended consequences of technology implementations. I think we need that. I think we really need to broaden our perspective. I work in a center now where we collaborate with public administration, with sociologists, with urban planners. They challenge me. Should I stop? 1 minute. They challenge my perspective. I used to be the technology optimist. I'm still sort of an optimist, but now I get to see some of the other perspectives more clearly. And especially, I think the sociologists, they make some very good points, because They are asking, what are the implications of the development now in terms of power, in terms of equality in various areas? And I think they make some valid points. So I think this development that we are seeing, it calls for action, both for governments in terms of really being careful about legislation, policy development, perhaps regulation. I think there are some interesting questions to discuss regarding regulation in a global economy and also a global service economy. I think it challenges us as researchers. I think in the audience here there are mostly public administration, information systems, and computer science scholars. I think we need a much broader set of scholars to dig into these issues that we are facing. And I think it challenges us as citizens and as consumers to be maybe a little bit more careful with how we manage our data. Thank you.
Thank you, Leif. So, Lucy, what is Australia doing about this critical thinking in the digital transformation?
So, first of all, I'd like to say thanks for having me, and thank you to my co-speakers. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. So I think actually digital transformation is really hard, and one of the key things that we seem to be missing from our conversation is the impact that we have on individuals and people. So we've heard a lot about digital transformation being complex from a systems, from a tech, from a societal perspective, but actually the individual is the key and is going to be at the heart of unlocking all of this transformation. And I say this because I'd like to tell you a secret, and that is that I'm not a technologist. I'm relatively new to this field. I joined the Digital Transformation Agency about a year and a half ago, moved from Smart Cities, a cities policy area in the Prime Minister and Cabinet Department. And I experienced an enormous transition personally as a leader in the public sector. So I all of a sudden had a very large number of Gen X and Y individuals who did not operate as traditional public servants did, and really challenged my ability to be a leader. And I say this because it is extremely important that we build the capability that we need to be able to transform our services and to transform government as a whole and to meet the needs and expectations of our users and our citizens. And I don't think enough of the conversation is centering around this. One of the key things I think that we need to learn as leaders is the ability to unlock collaboration, which of course is integral to us being able to think creatively and to be able to think in different ways. One of the things that Randall Bergeau, our CEO, spoke of yesterday was our GovX program, which is taking a macro look at the transformation of services using life events mapping. And we do that because it enables us to take a systemic view and to be able to break down what is an extraordinarily complex system and a complex set of problems. Because, of course, the way in which government is structured, the way it operates, our culture, our aversion to risk, our performance systems, the things that incentivise us, all, of course, work against these things. And so, as individuals, we are having to find new ways to work the system to our advantage. So my key thing for you today to think about is how it is that us as individuals are being primed and ready to tackle these issues, and the leadership qualities and the support that we need to offer individuals in undertaking this enormous and very important challenge.
Thank you. Before we go into the discussion, I would like maybe, Julia, do you want to reflect on what we said before?
It might surprise you, but I actually agree with everything everybody has said. We're at a really important turning point in history. There is a danger. You talk about regulation. I think the Wild West days of everything that they built in garages with bubblegum and Band-Aid in Silicon Valley was great. Anything that was traditional needs to just be thrown out. I think we're seeing the dangers of that, right? We just assumed that if it came out of Silicon Valley and was put on the web, goodness was going to flow.
I think 2016 was a wake-up call, although I do always get suspicious of thinking people are so stupid that just a bot, misled them. But that's a different story. Like, the bigger systemic problem was highlighted in 2016. To the multi-stakeholder and broadening the stakeholder, the last UN panel was great, precisely because it wasn't people like all of us. There were ethicists, there were lawyers, there were philosophers, there were sociologists, and there were young Gen X startup VC type, kids that were really making me feel very unintelligent and old. So there is a change, but and there is an awareness of the dangers, right? And that is really good. One thing that alarmed me in New York was the natural instinct was we're just going to regulate it. All we need is legislation and policy, government to do something to stop this. And we know that that may not be the right model. Like, the world has really changed. And maybe we need to be, you ban Uber, Lyft comes up. You ban Airbnb, another app comes up. So maybe we need to be thinking differently with different tools, auto-regulation, creating an ecosystem of people in which trust, something that is earned between stakeholders rather than ethics, something that is kind of abstract, we engender. I think we're in an era, our chairman has said this, of good tech and bad tech. I'm furious that all of my sons, not only that he thinks Google is the internet because it's infused throughout everything in his schooling, but that his data is going to be sold and monetized when he's 18. We need to mandate that our data is our data and that tech companies don't use it. And I'm really proud. I'm not a corporate, anybody that has known me, I'm not a corporate spokesperson by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm really proud that the IBM Corporation many, many, many years ago, so we will not monetize our clients' data. So, you're not hearing about us with the trillion-dollar valuations and everything, and we really could have been because we were at the tip of the spear on that, but we saw the dangers. So I would just caution that we need to be thinking about the implications. They're not all good, but we also, in our concern, we need to make sure we're not using yesterday's solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a call for new solutions. Maybe in the audience we collect 2 or 3 questions or comments, and then we'll go for a final round of reflections from our panel. Please, in the back, I think you were before. Okay. 1, 2, yeah. And then we'll take it here.
Okay.
We'll say 4, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm Boyega Ojo from UNU-EGOV. My question is about linking the digital transformation agenda to development. And I'm particularly looking at the citizens that do not really have voice.
Can you speak a little bit louder? It's difficult to hear you.
Okay. So I'm talking about linking the discussion on digital transformation to development. All right, and also focusing on the minority, on not just the minority, on the majority. If you look at developing countries, the majority of the citizens that do not actually have any voice in this. So in developed countries, there'll be minorities, but in developing countries, they're actually the majorities. So most of this framework, when you translate to developing country context, you're talking really about the middle class. When you talk about your sprints or your design thinking, you are really going to be looking at personas that are linked to the middle class. How do you really want to engage the voiceless, which is a majority in developing country context, particularly in terms of capacity? So that's one question I'd like to.
Thank you for the question about building capacity in the society. Please, the second question here.
Hello. I'm a student from a university and also a trainee lawyer, and I made some work about blockchain. So my questions are about blockchain technology. The first one is, there is already some trials in blockchain technology in Australia, like the Australian National Blockchain. What do you think that in a closer future, the blockchain what service can blockchain offer to people in Australia, for example? And the second question is, if this technology has the power to resolve the prosperity paradox that says, the more prosperity there is in a society, the wealth is more concentrated in the rich people, the middle class stagnates, and the poor gets poorer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. About the democratic potential of blockchain. Please, a third question.
Hi, Reshma from India. Well, with all this discussion going on, there were two things which popped up. One was that in my mind. One was that there's a lot of talk about policy making and regulation so that data can be safely shared, etc. But even with governments which come up with policies and regulations towards it, do we have sufficient implementation tools to see that those policies, regulations can get properly implemented? So are we still in the hands of a few big companies who are actually holding these data and sharing these data across? So it's up to their ethical standards that it's all being, it's all being managed. And does government really have the tools to check whether the data is being gathered in the way it should be and being shared in the way it should be? And along with that, attached to it, there's another question, that is, with this marathon which the IT companies and this whole IT environment is going across, possibly we have not been able to come up with enough ecologists, sociologists, the other fields which are using this IT environment, get sufficiently educated about the risks and opportunities that it is providing. Because as IT evangelists and of course positive thinkers in IT, we have possibly a narrower outlook towards what the other fields and the exposure and the risks and the opportunities that they can face because of these innovations, and have a more inclusive and outlook towards future discussions and about them.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. So it's about building capacity both in the government and also in the society to have a critical thinking about technology. Here we had another question here. No, in the front first, and then...
Oh, okay.
In the front first, and then you. No, 1 second, please.
Okay.
The front first, then in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a very simple question, and that the question is addressed to Julia. You know, when we started off e-governance, the goal was very simple. I mean, it was kept very simple, that e-governance is to make government invisible. Now, when we talk about digital reinvention, transform, and personal experience, now, you talked about keeping the goal in mind when we're on the journey. So, what is the alignment of the goal that we started off, e-governance, and the goal of digital reinvention? Is there a correlation, or digital reinvention is a subset of the main goal?
Sorry, the role of what and digital reinvention? I'm sorry, I didn't...
Sorry?
It's kind of hard to hear. I'm so sorry. The role of... What's the role of...
The first goal, when we started off e-governance, the goal was make the government invisible.
To make government invisible. So we can come back to that. So let's collect the last question, and then we can answer all of that together. Please.
Thank you. I'd like to piggyback on Mark's question about changing government's view of innovation. And I can say back in the 80s, we invented identity PKI in infrastructure technology. We actually sold it into NSA from Australia and Bank of America and so on, Cable and Wireless UK. And we bashed our heads on the wall with government about it here for 10 years. We're now trying to address social inclusion, social isolation, loneliness, aged care, and I'm seeing the same thing. It seems that Australia does not recognise what infrastructure technology is, or will politicise infrastructure approaches and strategies, and therefore we stay behind. So we're always about 10 or 15 years behind with our approaches to innovation in infrastructure. So I'd like to see that addressed, please.
Okay, so it sounds like quite some agenda for us to discuss, right? On the one hand side, we're talking about how to build capacity in the developing countries, on how to bring them actually up to speed for those that are actually not in the elite. We had the second question about the potential of blockchain, on how to actually solve this problem that technology is more towards dictatorships than towards democracy, and can actually blockchain help us understand that better? We had a third question about this skills shortage and understanding in the government of digital capacity and critical thinking. How could that broaden into society? And then we had the question about how to, if government if the aim of making government invisible still is incorporated in the vision about digital reinvention, and then the last question was basically about path dependency, that government is not proactively adopting technology, right? So maybe we start with Julia, and then we take the round and hear what everyone wants to add to those questions.
That's a tour de force of questions. So let me just take a few bite-sized chunks. Capacity building is essential, and that comes back to workforce of the future. And that workforce of the future isn't necessarily digital, right? It takes holistic thinking, right? Sometimes in the developing world, it's been easier. Those legacy systems aren't there. That leapfrog to mobile and mobile delivery and micropayments in blockchain is really going gangbusters in Africa, in my experience, compared to other places of the world. So those skills are just part of what youth and the citizenry are just growing up with, right? So on the one hand, I don't think we have to not complexify what the risk is. At the same time, capacity building across the developing world, but all of our societies is really important because of the rate and the pace of change. And I think we need to be, to your point, Leif, and to the points about the socioeconomic disparities and the dangers of a technology dystopia, we need to be thinking about, and this is where I would argue there's a really serious role for government that I don't think is being tackled yet. We need to be thinking about the policy framework for economic health and vibrancy, because it's not just, and we all know this to your point about infrastructure, it's always been how can we rip costs out? And then all of us talk about that's going to be great because there'll be more time for frontline services and more nurses and more social workers, blah, blah, and it never happens. And that will be something that has to come from a policy level, that as we leapfrog and as we advance and take cost out and the workforce changes, we are reinvesting in the skills that our citizenry needs as driverless cars and truck drivers lose their jobs, as factory workers lose their jobs, and how do we creatively re-employ those skills? And I'll say one thing, the VC Genie Act that made me feel old at the UN blew my mind with some of the out-of-the-box sociological and ethically infused thinking about, for example, let's rethink ownership. So we don't own cars anymore, they're driverless cars, but after a certain number of journeys, that car has paid for itself because we pay per journey. Then the money goes into a social good pool that government then uses to redeploy workers. This is really out-of-the-box thinking. This is 21st century thinking, not 19th century updated 20th century thinking that I think we need, and we might be able to do something really cool around this at ICE next year.
Thank you, Julia. Nuras.
Yeah, regarding the capacity building, I think we can, for the inter-country capacity building, we can use agencies like UNU-EGOV. And within country, we have a model. I will give that model. We have, from the central government, we have deployed state emission teams, which are experts in the e-governance and technology, and 10 to 15 people have been deployed in each of these states. So they are able to coordinate with the central agency, so they are building capacity in the state. And some of these states have even deployed again, the technical people in each of the department. So that way, it is flowing from the central to the state and to the district level. So this model can be adopted by various other countries. And regarding that question about using the blockchain technology, I would suggest that the government services can be provided by using simple technologies. It is not that only you want to use the latest technology to provide the, so it will come when the technology matures and we have the sufficient use cases. But as of now, whatever technology is there, let us try to use that technology to provide the e-governance services.
Yeah, I think these are some really challenging issues that is buried in these questions. So thank you for that. I think also related to capacity building, I think the public sector and also the private sector in the education system has really a responsibility here. I think we in the universities are starting to prepare our students for a future that is not like. Our children will not experience the same work life as we experience. So how can we prepare our students for that? That's something that some of the areas of the universities are starting to prepare the students for. And one of the really good things about working in a university is engaging with young people, because they challenge our notions of what is good and bad. My students are they are creating their own companies on blockchain technology, challenging the ideas of the capitalist system today. I have no idea if they will win forward with this, but I really like that they do this, that they challenge us. So I think the universities has an important role across the world. I also think the school system under the university level has a critical role to play in preparing our children, our young citizens, for a future that will be different from what we have now. And I think there is variations across the world in what capabilities and competences are needed, and I think that should be up to the regions to really explore what we need to advance in the way and direction that we want to advance. So those are some reflections, at least, about how to build capacity. I think it's also obviously a multi-stakeholder responsibility to do that.
Thank you for the comments. Really quite an interesting field. The first thing I would say is that I don't think it's the role of government to be at the bleeding edge of technology. And so on the question of blockchain, our position in government is that absolutely that is a technology that exists and should be used for the greater good if there's a need for that. And what strikes me is that we have such fascination with blockchain and AI and all these new technologies, and yet we don't seem to be having the conversation that starts with the problem. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and therefore how do we go about solving that? And if it's the case that there's a blockchain or an AI solution to that, then that's fantastic, but at least it's a fit-for-purpose solution. So within the government, our position, as Randall mentioned yesterday, is that at the moment there exists other technologies that meet our needs, and so therefore blockchain is something for us to consider down the track. However, I did just find out that blockchain is being used at the moment for the sale of rare whiskies, which I hadn't heard of before, so I'm quite interested in that. But I think that perhaps also says a lot about the use of blockchain at the moment, doesn't it? So the other thing I was going to mention is that part of this conversation needs to be around who it is that is currently working in our workforces, as picking up on the point that Julia made. At the moment, the representation of women in STEM and ICT roles is still incredibly and rather sadly low. It's quite good in the APS. We've got sort of roughly 30-35% of female representation. But if it's the case that we don't have the full range of society in having and engaging in these conversations that we have today, then how can we expect that the conversation is going to meet the needs of us all? And just looking in the audience today, I suspect that there's a greater proportion of men than women. So I think that there's a lot for us to be doing in that space as well.
So maybe as a moderator, I can also input one thing that I thought was was not reflected fully yet. So I mean, I think about the path dependency and about the digital mindset. I think that's something that's hard to build, but that actually needs to be embraced throughout any organization, actually, maybe in the private sector or in the public. And I thought that was one thing that's the key difference between Estonia and maybe other countries where I'm currently living, is really about this approach towards technology. I think in Estonia it maybe already tipped, right? That sometimes it's a bit too proactive and sometimes it has to be using technology in order to be actually a valid solution. But still there is a more openness towards using it in the right way forward, right? So to have a needs-based approach, to have an approach where actually it solves a problem. And so that can also help us on how to build that. It's difficult to do, right? I mean, we know in some places it has worked, in other places it hasn't worked so well, right? Like in Germany, I would say that's probably one country that's really struggling with having a more positive approach towards using technology in the public sector versus a smaller country such as Estonia. So there are different challenges and so on, but certainly I think this mindset is something that we need to work on and to add to that. So with that, I would like to go into a last round. What is your one takeaway from this discussion that you would like to incorporate into your work from tomorrow on? Maybe Lucy, we'll start with you now and then we end on this one.
So my takeaway from this conversation is that I'd like to entice my organisation to engage in a more fulsome and perhaps controversial debate internally and across the public service around the way in which we are engaging in risk and making our decisions. I think that certainly the structures of governments are long-standing and by their very nature quite robust. But I think that we need to perhaps use those to engage in a different conversation, one that is around the consequences of our decisions and the pros and cons of the pace at which we are adopting technologies. So that's my one takeaway.
I think my takeaway is related to the hype that sort of dominates these discussions. We discuss AI, we discuss blockchain without most of us really fully understanding these technologies and the potential these technologies have to impact society. So my takeaway would be that we should really try to get more data to understand the implications of using these technologies. And I hope that can inform the discussion, make it a broader discussion. So I would like to see more data into these, just to get some more solid arguments and some solid background in the discussion about how to use these disruptive technologies and what the potential consequences might be.
Yeah, my takeaway is that for whatever services you are providing, it should be citizen-centric services. So whatever technology is there, technology will come and go. Maybe tomorrow you will have some better technology. But as on day, the government should be able to provide government services through whatever technology of the day is there. And another takeaway is that you told the unintended use of the technology which is available. So what could be the cause of concern using Google, other technology, and how the data can be misused? What are the possibilities? So that the citizens, the sociologists and philosophers, everybody is aware that how it can be misused. So people are aware about the dangers.
No, basically takeaway.
Well, I think it's been a fantastic discussion, and as always, it's really challenged my thinking, and thank you to the panelists as well, because I think it's really reinforced for me the need to further my own thinking and then the thinking of my team and organization about the holistic view of technology. I do believe the future is moving in that direction, but maybe even in my own discussions I should be talking a little bit more about the cons of that future and what it would take to get the real benefits, because the real benefit isn't a citizen-centric service. The real benefit has to be good for a holistic society that is healthy and fair and equal and vibrant. And I think there's a lot more thinking to be done around what we need to do to ensure that. I'm not convinced it's just regulation. I do think there's some more creative thinking around auto-regulation or self-regulation and trust.